Robert McCloskey books have always been a favorite in our family, especially this one about Burt Dow and his boat, the Tidely Idly. One summer, when my younger brother was little, we decided to get my father a pepper mill for his birthday. My little brother thought that the handle on the pepper mill looked like the tiller on the Tidely Idly. He was not one to keep a secret, so he asked if he could show our father what we had gotten him for his birthday. My brother took this book, and we thought he would point to the tiller on the Tidely Idly, but he was a bit more observant than we were. See if you can find what he pointed to that really did spill the beans about our father's birthday present. Burt Dow, Deepwater Man, by Robert McCloskey. Burt Dow is an old deep-water man, retired of course, but retired or not, he still keeps two boats. One is a dory so old and leaky that it can no longer be launched. Burt has painted it red and placed it on the little patch of lawn in front of his house, overlooking the bay. He's rigged it like one of the many ships he sailed to all the corners of the seven seas. It's filled to the gunwales with earth, and every summer Burt plants it with geraniums and Indian peas. The geraniums brighten up the deck, and the Indian peas climb the rigging and sway this away and that away in a smoky sou'wester. The other boat is an old double-ender named Tidely Idly, with a make-and-break engine. This boat leaks too, except when it's pulled on shore for caulking, patching, and painting, which is most of the time. She's a good boat, says Burt, patting her on the stern and giving her propeller an affectionate kick. She's got a few tender places in her planking, but you can't see daylight through her nowheres. The Tidely Idly is the pride and joy of Burt's life, and between odd jobs for natives and summer people, he keeps her painted and patched as best he can. Every time he does a paint job, he brings home the leftover paint and uses it on the Tidely Idly. That pink plank, he says, is the color of Jenny Poor's pantry, and the green is the color of the floors and doors in Doc Walton's waiting room. And there's the tan porch and trim color from Captain Haskell's house. Burt Dow has a sister named Leela, who keeps house for him, cooks the lobsters and fish he catches and clams he digs. She feeds the cock, she feeds the hens, she tends the garden, and helps Burt keep down the weeds in the dory full of geraniums and Indian peas. Leela is a very impatient person. Most impatient being on land or sea, says Burt, and he hustles about doing this or that so as not to keep her waiting. Mornings, when the cock crows, cockety-doodly, Leela is already down in the kitchen rattling her stove lids, clinkety-clank, and shouting, "Hit the deck, Burt! Time to eat!" And Burt, winking and blinking his eyelids, comes stumbling down the stairs to breakfast so as not to keep Leela waiting. Burt Dow has a giggling gull for a pet. Every morning she roosts on the roof of the shed where Burt keeps his fishing gear. The gull giggles, tee-hee-hee-hee, until Burt comes out and tosses her a pancake or a popover, or sometimes a piece of cinnamon toast. When Burt Dow puts out to sea in the Tidely Idly, everybody in town knows it. They hear him pump out all the water that has leaked in overnight, slish-ka-slosh, slish-ka-slosh. Then there is a pause while Burt checks out the tenderest spots between the pink plank, the color of Jenny Poor's pantry, and the green plank, the color of the floor and the doors in Doc Walton's waiting room. Then they hear him start up the make-and-break engine, clackety-bang, and they see him, firm hand on the tiller, giggling gull flying along behind, headed out of the cove and going clackety-bangety down the bay. One morning, the cock crowed, cockety-doodly, and Leela rattled her stove lids, clinkety-clink, shouting, "Hit the deck, Burt! Time to eat!" And Burt came downstairs, winking and blinking his sleepy eyes, and ate his breakfast. He tossed the giggling gull a popover, tee-hee-hee, and went down to the cove to pump out the Tidely Idly, slish-ka-slosh, slish-ka-slosh. He gently felt the tender spot between the pink plank, the color of Jenny Poor's pantry, and the green plank, the color of the floor and doors in Doc Walton's waiting room. "Giggling gull," he said sadly, 'Twon't be long before the Tidily Idly gets planted with geraniums and Indian peas. Then he started the make and break, clackety-bang, clackety-bang, and, firm hand on the tiller, Giggle and Go flying along behind, he headed out of the cove, going clackety-bangety down the bay to fish for cod. Bert kept studying the color of the sky, the color of the water, and the direction of the wind. An old deep-water man like me always keeps a weather eye out, says Bert, but he keeps two weather eyes out when he puts out to sea in a vessel as old and leaky as the Tidily Idly. It looked like a good day, so Bert took the Tidily Idly way out to the end of the bay and into the open sea. He shut off the make-and-break engine and let the boat drift on a gentle swill. Then he baited up his hook with clams and lowered it over the side to fish for cod. Bert didn't get any bites, not even a teeny-weeny nibble. So he cranked up the make-and-break and moved the Tidily Idly to another spot. But there were no fish there either. He didn't even pull up a pollock or a sculpin. There must be something down there frightening those fish, Bert confided to the giggling gull. Tee-hee-hee-hee, the giggling gull agreed. Then Bert felt a substantial sort of tug on his line that almost, but not quite, pulled him over the side. Then Bert pulled. Then Bert tugged. He heaved and he tugged. He grunted and he groaned until the Tidily Idly was practically stood on end. But he couldn't haul in even a single stitch of line. Must be caught on the bottom, said Bert. Tee-hee-hee-hee, the giggling gull was much amused, and she teetered on the tip of the tiller to see what would happen next. Well, Bert, so it seemed, finally got his line uncaught from the bottom and was hauling it in a moderate sort of way, not paying much attention to see if it needed more bait. The giggling gull was teetering to and fro on the tip of the tiller and tittering, tee-hee-hee-hee, now and then in a nervous sort of way. She might have noticed something or other that, for that particular moment, hadn't come to Bert's attention. But the very next moment, it came to Bert's attention that he'd pulled up a whale of a tail. Or 'twas the other way around. The whale of the tail had pulled up Bert. Bert grabbed the pump handle and hung on while he swung around, this away, that away. The giggling gull teetered on the tip of the tiller and laughed fit to split. Bert finally slacked on the line, or 'twas the other way around. Finally the tail slacked on the line. But then the tail began to thrash about, this away, that away, in such a manner as to call Bert's attention to the fact that there was a whale on the other end of it. "Ahoy there, whale!" bellowed Bert. "Hold your horses, keep your shirt on, head into the wind, and slack off the main sheet." The whale couldn't hear because his hearing gear was so far upwind from his steering gear that had come afoul of Bert's cod hook. "Ahoy there, you giggling gull!" shouted Bert. "Fly away down and tell this whale that there's a vessel with a couple of tender places in her planking. He's about to stave us in and send the Tidily Idly and all hands straight to Davy Jones' locker." The barb of Bert's cod hook was barely caught in the blubber of the tail, and since it didn't hurt, the whale quieted down and allowed Bert to haul his cod line cautiously so he could remove the hook. When the tail came within reach, Bert had his pliers ready. Working ever so carefully so as not to tickle, he snipped off the barb and eased out the hook. "There now," said Bert. "Only a little bit of a hole, and I've got just the thing for that." He reached down into the bottom of his toolkit and brought out a box of Band-Aids that Doc Walton had given him, just in case a lobster ever took a nip out of a finger. They were decorated with peppermint stripes, and, fortunately, they were the kind that stick to anything, even whale tails. "There now, Captain Whale," said Bert proudly. "I'll wager your rudder won't leak out any blubber or take aboard any water and get waterlogged now." But just then, ka-smack! A whopping big wave caught the Tidily Idly in a very embarrassing position and jolted her to the bottom of her keel, all the way from prow to propeller. Bert had forgotten to keep his weather eyes out, and with getting this poor whale out of all the trouble he was in, and hadn't noticed that it was beginning to blow. Tip of his tail snagged on a cod hook, and all his blubber about to dribble out through the hole. Burt started the make-and-break engine and managed to head the Tidily-Idly into the wind, but he knew he'd never make it home. However, he did make it to the leeward side of the whale, and, with a firm hand on the tiller, Giggling Gull flying along behind, headed chuggity-bangity up to the bow of the whale to have a face-to-face talk. "It's a blowin' a gale of wind, whale," bellowed Burt, coming right to the point, "and one good turn deserves another. The Tidily-Idly's taking aboard water between those two tender planks. I'm a-pumping just as fast as I can pump, but the water's above the floorboards and 'bout to stall the make-and-break. I'm afeard this vessel and all hands aboard are headed for Davy Jones' locker." "No doubt the Tidily-Idly tastes terrible," Burt went on, still coming right to the point. "And her barnacled bottom would smart your tongue, whale. The make-and-break would taste bitter as bile, and me, an old deep-water man, in oilskins and boots, along with this Giggling Gull, would make a gosh-awful trimmings for any meal. But," pleaded Burt, "couldn't you just sort of swallow us, temporary, of course, while this gale of wind blows itself out?" The whale gave a little snort and didn't say anything. Apparently, this was a whale of few words. He just opened his mouth wide and said, "Ah," in the classic tradition. Burt set the throttle of the make-and-break at wide open, and chug-a-da-bang, firm hand on the tiller, Giggling Gull flying along behind, guided the Tidily-Idly into the whale's mouth, and navigated the length of the gullet and into the whale's tummy, without so much as touching a tonsil on the way down. "Well," said Burt, "I naturally expected it to be dark inside a whale's tummy, but I didn't expect it to be as dark as this. A few portholes for light and ventilation would improve the design of this animal." This idea struck the Giggling Gull as funny, and she started giggling again. Burt was bending over and bumbling about in the dark, trying to find his lantern. He bumped his head on the make-and-break and yelled out, "Out of my way, you chuggity-bangified batch of old iron!" "Hee-hee-hee!" This made the Giggling Gull laugh fit to split. "Gull," Burt said testily, "someday I'll gaggle you. I never realized until now just how limited your vocabulary is. You'd be a poor companion to be shipwrecked on a sunny desert island with, and you're even worse on dry dock down on this damp tummy of a whale. If I had my choice, I'd take a dictionary every time." Burt had found the lantern and was feeling around, trying to find a dry spot on which to strike a match, when he had a very disquieting thought. "Supposing this whale didn't hear every word I said out there in that gale of wind?" he asked. "What if he doesn't understand the English language red-letter perfect? Or maybe he's absent-minded. He might not know or remember that we're supposed to be temporary guests, so to speak." "Yep, Giggling Gull," Burt continued. "We'll have to make sure we get ourselves unswallowed." He finally struck a match. He used the seat of his pants. "Well," he said as the light flared up, "I naturally expected pink would be the color of this whale's tummy, but I wasn't prepared for pink identical with the pink in Jenny Poor's pantry. Yep, like a big pink cave. That's what it is." Burt checked over his boat and found that the spot where the wave had slapped the Tidily-Idly on her tender bottom would need a considerable caulking, patching, and painting. In fact, the water that only moments before had leaked from the ocean into the Tidily-Idly was now leaking the other way around, out of the Tidily-Idly and onto the pink deck of the whale's tummy. After Burt finished his caulking, patching, and painting, he said, "'Tain't perfect, but she'll hold until we get home. I hope. Giggling Gull, we have to get busy. Leela's back home, rattling her stove lids and getting impatient over our not being home in time to eat." First of all, Burt tugged and shoved until he got the Tidily-Idly turned around so that her bow pointed in the right direction. Then he systematically set about trying to give the whale an upset tummy. "Whales have got strong stomachs," Burt explained to the Giggling Gull, "and it takes more than a mixture of ketchup and ice cream, pickles and peppermint, mince pie and mustard to call their attention to the fact that their tummy's upset." he began pumping out the tidily-idly to the very bottom of the bilge. In an old boat, that always produces a lot of interesting things, such as old crab claws, clams, bait, rusty fish hooks, a can opener, corroded pieces of brass, all mixed in with a nice big helping of sediment. Burt started scooping up the sediment on the end of a piece of shingle and began flipping a little glob here, a little glob there, making a big splatter spots in the lining of the tummy. The tummy began to quiver like a horse's flanks flicking off flies. Then Burt opened a leftover gallon of yellow deck paint and started sloshing it around, dribbling a little bit here, a little bit there. He was beginning to enjoy himself, probably because it was the first time he'd ever had a chance to really express his personality in paint. Next, he took a can of cup grease and, with the shingle, started splattering a few accents here and there. By now, the whale's tummy was all a-quiver. It disturbed Burt's aim a bit, and he misplaced a few globs of grease. Well, the tummy began to make rumbling noises, and flip a lot this way and flip a lot that way. And Burt knew right off that it would take only the tiniest touch to make the tummy break loose from its moorings and get upset. He, quick as he could, jumped into the tidily-idly and started up the make and break, shuggity-bang, shuggity-bang. "Giggly gull," he shouted, "wiggle your wings and fly away up to the fore hatchway, and tickle the whale's throat with a feather." Of course, the exhaust and jiggling of the make and break helped, but 'twas the tickle that turned the trick, and, with the dark, dampest rumble ever heard, the big tummy flipped this away and that away, and then, with a wail of a burp, boat and Burt, firm hand on the tiller, giggling gull flying along behind, make and break going wide open, came clackety-bangety out of the wide-open mouth of the whale, going so fast that they barely touched the tops the first two waves, and landed right dab smack in the midst of a whole school of whales. Burt eased up on the throttle of the make and break and tried to steer a snug course between two whale tails, one the color of Ginny Poor's pantry, t'other the color of the floor and doors in Doc Walton's waiting room. But the way was blocked by a whale tail, the color of the porch and trim in Captain Haskell's house. Every time Burt shifted course, there seemed to be more whale tails in the way. Finally, Burt stopped the make and break and let the tidily-idly drift among the whale tails while he decided what to do next. He bobbed around in his boat, studying the situation. Then he took out his glass and studied some more. Then he finally said, "Well, that's a whale of a lot of whale tails," making what amounted to a classic understatement. "You can hardly see the forest for the trees," Burt complained, "or the whales for the tails." There must be some reason, thought Burt, why all this school of whales are waving their tails towards the tidily-idly. "All except one," he added, peeping through his glass at the pale whale that looked exactly as though it had an upset tummy from a bit of bilge water, cup grease, deck paint, and having its throat tickled by a feather. "Yep, that whale looks a bit under the weather, but it also looks contented." But meanwhile, the rest of the school of whales seemed to be getting impatient. They twitched the tips of their tails and whacked them down on the water. "Careful!" bellowed Burt. "The tidily-idly's got a tender spot, and you're apt to spring a seam if you first don't swat us like a fly, which is no fit way for an old deep-water man and his vessel to go to Davy Jones." What with the tidily-idly's regular leaks and all the water being splashed aboard by impatient whale tails, Burt had to keep pumping, slish-ka-slosh, slish-ka-slosh, and he didn't have much time to wonder what made one whale contented and what made all the rest of the school so slap-happy with their tails. Stronger and younger men might have given up, but not our deep-water man, Burt Dow. He kept right on pumping with one hand, slish-ka-slosh, slish-ka-slosh, while he poked around in his toolbox with the other. Still pumping, slish-ka-slosh, slish-ka-slosh, he pulled out a Band-Aid, unfurled it from its wrapping between his teeth, and slapped it onto the tip of the nearest whale tail. Burt knew right off his troubles were over. The whales were only impatient at my taking so long to understand 'em, Bert explained to the giggling gull. Whales is really very patient about standing or swimming in line to have their tips of their tails decked with a Band-Aid. After all the whale tails had been decorated, each with a peppermint-striped Band-Aid, the entire school swam, tails held high, in a tremendous circle around the Tidily Idly. An old deep-water man like Bert couldn't resist shouting, "There she blows!" in the best classic tradition. Then, all together, 1, 2, 3, the school of whales blew 3 big blows for Burt Dow and swam off over the horizon. "I never did see," said Bert, "so many tons of contentment come from such a little old Band-Aid box." He still had one Band-Aid left, and he knew he'd never need it to himself. Never was a lobster hatched or catched who could catch a clamp on Burt Dow. So, just for a joke, he said, "Giggling Gull, let's take the last Band-Aid home to Leela." "Tee-hee-hee-hee," giggled the gull, because she always was one who enjoyed Bert's little jokes. "And we'd better take it right now," said Bert, so as not to keep her waiting. But then he noticed that the water was up over the floorboards. So he started pumping again, slish-ka-slosh, slish-ka-slosh. Then he cranked the make and break, clankety-bang, clankety-bang, and, with a firm hand on the tiller, Giggling Gull flying along behind, he headed the Tidily Idly back up the bay. They made it home just as the cock began to crow.